Good morning and welcome to Community Roundtable, a free public service brought to you on AM 1590 KDJS. If you're a member of a nonprofit organization and would like to be featured on the program, call the KDJS Newsline at 320-235-2900. That's 320-235-2900.
Well, today on the Community Roundtable here on KDJS AM 1590, FM 105.7, we visit with a local author and worldly traveler, I might add, Barb Levin. Do you like Barb Levin or Barb Mossberg Levin? What's your preference?
Barb Levin is fine.
That sounds good. All right. Barb has got a book that she has put together of some various writings. Going to talk about that and talk about what's down the pipe, so to speak, because you've got more plans than this. First of all, Barb, name of the book.
The name of the book is Old Norway Lake Reminiscences-stories by Gabriel Stene, the Pioneer Kid.
And tell me about Gabriel.
Gabriel came with his parents way back in 1868, I believe, to Kandiyohi County. He was about, I think he was about 11 years old when his family arrived over by Norway Lake. And this book is his memories of growing up on the wilderness prairie, as he calls it, and some of the pioneer hardships and antics that occurred that he thought were worthy of writing down when he was in his later years, probably 50 years after the fact.
What caused him to write them down? Was he a writer by trade or just wanted to preserve the memories? What?
He wanted to preserve the memories. He thought something that was very important was that the younger generation, he called it the now growing generation, would understand what their parents and their grandparents endured and went through and had to suffer in order to make this this fertile area, this beautiful area, livable. Very
interesting. You said it was 1868?
1868.
That's when he arrived?
Yes.
And did he have relatives here before then, or?
No, he was his family was one of the first pioneer white families in the area.
Very, very close to the Dakota Uprising, the battle.
Yes,
that we had,
it was about.
Be 6 years later than that.
Yeah.
Wasn't that 1862?
1862, the Sioux Uprising occurred, and the area was void of any white settlers for at least 2 years after that. And his family came very shortly thereafter and found a farm place and built dug a dugout, and then later built a log cabin.
Explain a dugout.
The early pioneers would need a place to stay, and there wasn't much for lumber on the prairie, and the most convenient or most simple way to build a living structure was to find a hillside and dig into it in such a way that you were facing south, because the best warming sun, even in the wintertime, happens coming from the south. So
right.
they'd find a south-facing slope, and they'd dig into that and then put some kind of a shelter across the top, probably layer it with sod and grass, and they'd dig themselves a little kitchen area, put a wood stove in there, and probably have a small area for sleeping and maybe a table, and that's about all that they had in those dugouts.
Well, nowadays we call that an earth home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Gosh, it's hard to imagine initially not having the lumber to... I mean, we have a lot of trees around here. How about back then?
He writes all about the prairie being just this wilderness of tall grasses that it was very difficult to travel through because you couldn't see the ground. And if you would head out across the prairie thinking, I see a tree and that's maybe on the edge of a lake over there and I'm going to head straight for that, you would come into some trouble because there were lots of low areas that were swampy, sloughy, and if you got into that, say with a a team of oxen or a wagon that you were pulling with horses, or even just walking, you could get yourself mired in that and then not be able to get out. And so it wasn't all that easy to travel across the wide open prairie.
Or I imagine there could be a rut or a little ravine, a hole in the ground you can't see, covered by the grasses. All of a sudden you drop a foot or whatever. Yeah.
And one of the things that maintained the prairie was back then, with this wide open space of grasses, if a fire started, say, out near where Bismarck, North Dakota is now, the winds would carry that very, very fast, and it would burn everything quickly. And so the only areas where there were trees back then would have been the ones that were sheltered by some body of water. For example, around the Sibley Park area, there would have been a few trees, nowhere near as many as there are now, but the trees would have been able to grow up in that area because it's completely surrounded by water on the west and the south sides.
Just want to throw in a little plug for Sibley. Recently, there was a survey done for 2017 in Minnesota, and the most visited attractions in Minnesota. Now, number one in the entire state is Mall of America. But then they divided it into like 4 geographical sections, I believe it was. And Sibley in central Minnesota was the second most visited attraction of all of central Minnesota. And it's a big area, beaten out only by a casino up by Lake Mille Lacs.
Oh, wow.
And Lake Carlos State Park north of Alexandria was third in central. So a number of state parks were mentioned. And in our area, Sibley is one of our prime jewels, so to speak. And, well, you and I have been there a lot, along with my wife and sometimes some grandkids. We love going out to Sibley.
One of the things that astounded me when I was doing some historical research a few years ago was I was looking in the old 1905 Candiothi County history book, and the caption under the picture read, "A view of Lake Andrew from Mount Tom." And in that little picture, I could count on maybe 2 hands the number of trees between Mount Tom and Lake Andrew.
Really?
And I swore that picture was mislabeled. And so I talked to some of the old timers around the area, and they said, "Oh no, years ago you could stand on top of Mount Tom without the lookout tower and easily see off in every direction very clearly, not being obstructed by the number of trees that are there today."
That is amazing. We take for granted the woods we have, I guess, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Man, that is just amazing. Talking with Barb Levin. Barb's got a book she has put together. Old Norway Lake is what it's called. Reminiscences, right?
Reminiscences.
Saying that correctly. All right. Gabriel Stene again. The stories in the book. I noticed you had a lot of pictures in the book. When did you start doing the research and the work to get this together?
Well, quickly about the pictures, I did not find any of those pictures. I was blessed with a acquaintance of a great-great-grandson of Gabriel Stene. His name is Bruce Johnson, and I can't remember whether he found me or I found him, but we got to talking, and he had a collection of family pictures that he happily shared with the publishing of this book. So he gets the credit for the pictures. And then I also met a guy named Jim Larson, who is also a great-great-grandson of Gabriel Stene, and he shared some family genealogy and some other little tidbits, other writings of Gabriel Stene. And then I forgot what your question was.
Just getting things all together. When did you start doing the research, and where did the idea come from? The research started. How long did it take to come to fruition here?
Good question. The research started by accident. I was given a job out at Sibley State Park. I believe it was about 1974 or 75, and I was just trying to earn some money to go to college, and I needed to take off a year of college to earn that money. And Dave Lace, who was the park manager at that time, got a grant for me to stay on at the state park and work through the winter. And then I had to come up with some kind of a project that could keep me busy. And I said, well, how about if I write a history of the park? And as a very young college student, my research abilities were limited, and all I knew to do was take a plat map and find out who the previous owners of the land were, and then just read through old newspapers. I taught myself how to skim read, and I would take home volumes of the newspaper, big bound volumes from the New London Times and the Wilmer Weekly, came out on once a week, papers. Actually, Gary Dahlberg would let me take out like 2 big volumes of the New London Times at a time, and I would page through those. And if I found anything that had a name of a landowner that was Sibley Park, I'd make a Xerox copy of that. Well, in that research, I was looking through some Wilmer Tribune, and I saw a column named "Old Norway Lake Reminiscences" by the Pioneer Kid, and I thought, don't read those, because they'll take you off your track. They're a rabbit trail. But then one day I was skim reading, and I thought, well, maybe there's something about Sibley Park that's in here, and I don't want to miss that. So I read one of the stories, and the story happened to be where Gabriel was a young kid, and he was with his father at the Railson farm. And the Railson farm was where the mail came twice a month. So it was a Saturday, and all the neighbors from all over the place were gathered at the Railson farm to get the mail. And he overheard the adults talking, he said, and they were talking about those 13 Swedes that were killed by the Indians about 7 miles west of there. And he said his curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to go and find out where this location was, because they were buried in a mass grave. And so the very next day, he got up early in the morning, and he headed out across the prairie wilderness, and he found the next farm place and talked to the farmer there. And the guy said, well, you got to go so much farther, and actually there's a line of trees way over there on the horizon, and that's the slough that's east of the Munson farm. And because the Munsons had bought the Brobergs property where that whole clan was killed over there. And he said, then you just head straight west, follow that tree line and the shoreline of the lake there, and when you get over to where the Munson's farm place is, then you just ask Mr. Munson. So he gets over there, and he said there was a bunch of farm machinery laying around where the cabin had been. Cabin was burned, so there was nothing left of that. And when he said there was a bunch of farm machinery, you think 1868 farm machinery would have been a one-bottom plow and maybe a
horse-drawn, obviously,
ox-drawn equipment. So there couldn't have been much laying there. Anyway, he said when he got to the depression where the 13 were buried, that he was so overcome with emotion that he couldn't eat the little bit of bread that he'd stuck in his pocket for his lunch. I was in love with Gabriel Stene at that point. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to start collecting these stories, because these are incredibly important history of our area, and
hugely, yes.
Yeah, and they need to be preserved. So I made a separate little scrapbook of my own way back in the 70s of these stories, thinking that someday I'm going to get them published. And someday took 40 years.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Talking to Barb Levin again. The book is called Old Norway Lake Reminiscences, and it's interesting as all get out. You're talking to a history fan, number one here, so it's going to be interesting no matter what to me. But to some people who are maybe unfamiliar with the story, I think they will want to get familiar. You've got the book available for sale at some locations. Am I correct in that?
Yes, the Candioi County Historical Society has books, and there are a couple of locations, actually 3 locations in New London. The Middle Fork Cafe, the Lake Effect Coffee, and Anita Stuhlen's, what's her, Mill Pond. Mill
Yes,
Pond.
yes, yes, yes.
Mill Pond Mercantile has some of the books, and also the Middle Fork here in Wilmer has some books also.
Over on the east side by Home State Banks.
Yes.
That area, yeah. So
Yes.
very cool, and it's not so expensive you can't stock and stuff it for somebody at Christmas, right?
It's selling for $20 a piece,
Good deal.
and it's a bargain if you love history.
Great deal. You mentioned the Brobergs and the others that lost their lives in 1862. For those of you who want a really quick read and a little bit of a solemn place to be, obviously, to me, when I'm out walking the dog, I live in New London. They are reinterred in New London at the Lebanon Cemetery, and then you can read the marker and the names of everyone, and it just kind of makes you stop in your tracks today, as it did back for Mr. Stene back in the 1860s. Gosh, crazy history, and you've given some talks on this. You were featured at the Historical Society one night, weren't you?
Yes.
Special
yes.
guest. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And anything like that coming up?
No. Just here.
As you mentioned Sibley, you mentioned working there back in the 70s. I know you've been down the frontage road from us where the Historical Society is. Maybe something totally unrelated, but you've also been involved with some things out at Prairie Woods Environmental Learning Center, right?
Yes.
Pertaining to?
Mostly natural history and some of the events that they do out there.
That was a college study of yours? Natural history, trees, grasses?
I was a biology major in college and planning on working in the state parks the rest of my life. It didn't end up being that, though.
And for people that are curious what Barb does now, she's one of the greatest bus drivers we've ever known out of this area.
Thank you, Al.
Barb drives tour groups in the big bus. Yes, she knows how to handle a clutch if she needs to, right? Oh, gosh. And I should make mention, too, that out at your place right now, of course, you've got a little bit of history right in your backyard called the museum. People may be familiar with you because of that.
Yes, I have an amazing husband who also loves natural history and is passionate about collecting everything from Indian arrowheads to seashells to butterflies to fossil seashells. He loves books about Native Americans and anything natural history, and he's got a fabulous collection of things over there.
And you've managed to unearth a few things on your own.
A few.
It's got to be tough to be able to look down in a certain area and go, oh, that's an arrowhead. Not everybody will recognize it.
You know what? I had no idea how to find an arrowhead until I met Larry Levin, and he took me out training me and drew a big circle on the ground in a plowed field and said, now there's something Indian in this circle. And I'm looking at dirt and more dirt and a few scattered rocks and some leaves, and I'm going, I don't see it. And he said, well, look for a triangle shape.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I looked a little harder, and not only was there a triangle-shaped arrowhead there, but there was a small chunk of pottery. I was hooked.
Mm-hmm. I remember as a kid growing up in southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, that general area, Native American history there too, and always after a rainstorm, there was a certain hillside that would have people walking on it.
Oh.
In southern Minnesota, near Sherburne.
Okay.
Down that direction off Highway 4, kind of piqued my interest at a young age. I thought they're looking for old stuff, which intrigued me. It would intrigue a lot of people, I think, But back to the book. I'm going to lead into this in a little different way. The other morning, I stepped outside and go to work very early to get here to the radio station and everything, and I heard a hoot owl, and I have not heard a hoot owl in a while. And I'm in town. And then one morning I step out and something's walking down the street out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, all right, who's out besides me this time of day? Me and the newspaper delivery person. It was a deer, and not the first time I've seen deer. We've had them in our yard in the middle of town. And then I'm driving to work another day, and I get by the Eagle Lake store, headed south on 71. There's a big coyote. Really looked healthy. The fur, the tail, I mean, some of them look a little mangy, but this one is in front of my headlights relatively close. No threat to hit it. Healthy-looking critter. And then, of course, a week ago, Thursday, in Spicer, is the black bear on a Thursday night. You know, if I had taken a different route home from our band rehearsal at the church, I might have been able to see this bear. I thought, I took the wrong corner, you know. And I'm leading up to the bear story because you've got a bear story in the book that is quite entertaining. If you would read that for us, that's pretty funny stuff going on here. Now it involves a bear, a bar, and a beer. 3 B's, right? Okay.
Okay, so Gabriel Stene writes what he calls a bear story. And he says that in the very early pioneer days, not very far from there, was a new settler by the name of Norstedt, father of Peter, August, and Albert Norstedt, living near a little lake known then as Norstedt Lake. One fine sunshiny morning, Mr. Norstedt spied a little bear cub sound asleep in the sunshine on a sunny hillside not far from there. In a hurry, he grabbed a crutch in the shape of a 2-tined hay fork, put that over his neck, and pressed down where he had him fully in his charge. He managed to get him into a box and kept him captive for some time. He finally sold him to Mr. J.H. Mountain of Wilmer, co-partner of Hanscom and Mountain Meat Market, first meat market in Wilmer, located on the Merchants Hotel corner, Pacific Avenue and 4th Street. Mr. Mountain lived back of the Bethel Lutheran Church, in which yard he kept his pet cub. He got very tame like a dog, but kids playing with him made him ugly. He finally turned him loose for short spells. He was fond of beer and got in the habit of visiting a certain saloon on Pacific Avenue where he mustered up on twos like other customers looking for his turn to come.
That means standing on the back legs. The bear mustering up on twos, right?
Right. He stood up on his hind legs. I remember Herman Brem, who has the distinction of being the firstborn baby boy in early Wilmer, interfering with Mr. Bear at his beer gulp, which resulted in torn and shredded clothes.
The bear didn't like being messed with.
The boy looked like a picked crow, was then just a little shaver. The bear was fond of Mr. Mountain, so was Mr. Mountain of his pet Idea. Mr. Mountain and his pet disappeared from Wilmer some 45 years ago, and the little lake west of New London has been honored with the name Bear Lake ever since.
That's how Bear Lake came into being. Before that, did it have a name?
Well, he said that it was kind of called Norstedt Lake.
Okay.
But then there is a Norstedt Lake named Norstedt Lake to this day that's a little bit south and west of where Bear Lake is.
Not far from Lake Andrew again. That general area.
That general area.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's on the west side of Highway 71.
So Wilmer had a beer drinking bear.
Wilmer had a beer drinking bear, and it was probably in the years before Candioi County was a dry county.
Oh, the visual.
Yeah.
Wonder what the name of the bar was. There've got to be stories, though. If the walls could talk from days gone by of people's memories, that's why you put this book together.
Exactly.
Stories like that, and there are more. There are interesting things. Gosh, $20. Historical Society. You mentioned the 3 locations in New London again, if you want to pick one up. Or just look up Barb in the phone book. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say, because I got a phone book recently. There's hardly anybody in phone book anymore.
Yeah.
Gets a little thin. Well, Barb and Larry's Museum on County Road 40 east of New London would be a place to stop by and leave a note on the door or something, if you're not there. So now you've got a plan. You've got something else in the works. What's going on?
Well, I decided that this is such a valuable resource for people finding their own family history. If you've had relatives that are in this area since the 1800s, the chances that your family is listed and named in here and there's some kind of a story are pretty good. So I made an index, and the second publication of this volume will have an index in it. The index that I've come up with so far is 12 pages long of names of families and events like prairie fires and blizzards and murders and farming with oxen and hiking from, walking from here to St. Cloud and different things like that.
Something we would never dream of doing today.
That's where they went to go do their shopping, was all the way to St. Cloud way back in those days.
On foot.
On foot, yes.
And some of the things they carried back were not light. You told me stories before about some pretty heavy loads being transported by these guys,
Yeah, they were amazing.
Wow.
So I made an index in the second edition of this first bunch of stories will be in that. And he has also written hundreds of obituaries and then several tributes to the pioneers that were dying off in his time, and a whole bunch of other stories that were published in other newspapers. And I'm collecting all of those and as many of as I can find, and putting those in another volume 2. He also wrote a great deal of stuff in the Norwegian language. I tried to get somebody that could maybe translate that, and actually there was an event in Wilmer last summer called
Yes, I
log.
Yeah, the log. A log is like a county in Norway.
Yeah.
Yeah, the seven log.
The seven log.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a man from Norway that was here, and I got introduced to him, and I had him look at some of the Norwegian writing of Gabriel Stene, and I said, is there any chance I could get somebody to translate this for me? And he said it would be extremely difficult because this is a 150-year-old language. They don't speak Norwegian like that in Norway anymore.
Wow.
And so I'm not even going to tackle that end of the project. But there's a probably a 5-inch folder of stuff that he wrote in Norwegian also.
Oh, my. That's a lot.
The guy was prolific.
That is. He went through a lot of pencils.
He did. Well, and then he wrote hundreds of editorials. His passion was dry, which means no alcohol in the county. He wanted to get prohibition going, and was successful in that campaign somewhat. And he was passionate about history. He wanted to get Sibley. He helped a little bit about Sibley Park, not so much about Sibley, mostly about the preservation of Munson Lake, where the Broberg family was killed. And he wanted to get the Isle of Refuge, which is on Norway Lake, where many of the settlers fled and spent, I think, 3 nights on that island, fearing for their lives.
And that's an easy part of our county to visit, because if you take Highway 40 west of New London, go up to the Norway Lake Church, the big brick church on the north side of the road, there is a plaque there by the parking lot. And you can see like West Norway Lake, and the plaque describes the Isle of Refuge and everything. If you just want to, again, a real quick, brief thing that won't take long to read, and you can stand where they were back in 1862, basically,
Yeah.
Wow. We have a lot of those plaques around the county. A lot of them, they pertain to many, many things in our history. I think of a new one that went up in New London maybe just a few years ago at the Larson home on First Avenue Northwest. That big, beautiful brick home. A plaque out there for being one of the oldest in New London, first home, founder of New London, Louis Larson. And there's a plaque right out in front of that house now on a post. You can stop and read that. My dog walking takes me many places around town, and I go by there too. So got to do that. So, gosh, time is flying by. You're going to be flying out here relatively soon. This is a topic for a whole nother day, but you're going back to the Philippines.
I'm going back to the Philippines and taking 5 ladies from my church with me.
And you were there as a missionary for, what was it, 15 years?
Yes, from 1985 until 2000.
And you're headed back, same village?
Same area. We're going to a village that I probably only visited about 5 times because it was extremely difficult to get there. It took about 5 hours to hike to get to that village. And I also had other villages that I was visiting. This is way up in the mountains and among tribal people. They were written up in the National Geographic in 1911 as being the headhunters of northern Luzon. And yes, they really did do headhunting. Revenge killing was one of the high values of their culture.
Yeah.
For the most part, that doesn't happen anymore.
For the most part.
For the most part.
It's comforting.
So we're not going to an area where we fear for our lives at all. There is a road that goes to the village now. And back when I was going there was no electricity, no TV, no radio, no telephone.
Not a single luxury.
Not a single
as
luxury.
Primitive as can be.
Primitive
Sounds like a TV show. We have to go. Our time is up, unfortunately. Barb, say goodbye in the Bontoc language.
Gawisay Arkuyu.
Yes. and goodbye, Dave. Thanks, Barb, for coming in. What a great, speedy half hour of fun this has been. We're going to do this again and talk about the Philippines, okay?
Very good.
All right, Barb Levin with us today. That's Community Roundtable.
You've been listening to Community Roundtable, a free public service brought to you on AM 1590 KDJS. If you're a member of a nonprofit organization and would like to be featured on the program, call the KDJS Newsline at 320-235-2900. That's 320-235-2900.